All right. Welcome. I see some names and faces that I know a lot and some that I don't. So quickly let me introduce myself, and then I'm going to hand the microphone and the camera over to my friend and colleague, Alyssa Jomay. Somebody's saying they're not receiving sound. I think that's Adam, that may be on your end, I think. Okay. So I'm Hunt Priest, and I'm an Episcopal priest in the United States, and I actually live in Savannah, Georgia, and was in a research study at Johns Hopkins in 2016, and 2 years ago started this nonprofit to educate the Christian community about psychedelics and to educate the wider world about what's possible within the Christian container, in a real quick thumbnail. And we do these monthly forums to bring information and connection to the wider community. They're recorded, so we'll turn this one around. This is, I think, an especially pertinent one. We'll turn that around as quickly as we can, do a little editing on the front end and the back end, and then get that out. Spiritual direction is the topic today, and that's been such an important part of my own spiritual journey. I've been in spiritual direction since about 1998. And not every month, but consistently in spiritual direction since then, and currently am. And it's been an important, like I said, important part of my own journey to being a better Christian and a more spiritual person, and my journey to the priesthood, and then my own wellness and connection as a priest in the church. It was grounding to me. The skills of a spiritual director are not necessarily the skills of a clergy person, although there is some overlap, but it's a distinct ministry and vocation and practice. And we have 4 actually people on the call today that are both friends and colleagues and excellent spiritual directors, and are working and open to this intersection of psychedelics and Christianity and religion and spiritual direction. So there are 4 wonderful people for us to talk to. Alyssa Jomay will be leading the conversation as soon as I stop talking. I'll hand the mic over to her. Came to us as an intern through Naropa University, and then has stayed on and is helping facilitate groups like this. She's one of our community connectors. So she's working with local groups and with spiritual directors. So I'll pop Alyssa's email into the chat at some point so you have access to her. She's a really good contact, especially if you're interested in starting a local group or connecting to Ligare more generally beyond the email. We have a couple people that are doing that. So Alyssa she'll say a little bit about herself in just a minute. Beverly Hosea is a priest of the Episcopal Church and a longtime friend of mine. She and I worked together on Mercer Island at Emmanuel Episcopal Church. She saved my butt a lot, and in the context of her own experience as a priest and as a gifted spiritual leader. So Beverly Hosea. Douglas Soy, who lives in Portland and has become a friend of mine in the last couple of years, is also an excellent spiritual director and gifted person, and a friend and a colleague. And Annette Kaye, who's in the United Kingdom and is also a spiritual director and very gifted. So they'll say a little bit more about their own practice, and I'm going to turn it now over to Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Hunt. I am so excited to be here and talk about all things spiritual direction. As most of us and the panelists would probably agree, there's still quite a few people who have never heard of spiritual direction and what is this? And I'm going to start us off with a poem, and then I'll have each of our panelists introduce themselves. So go ahead and settle yourself into your seat and relax for a moment. This leap of faith is not a one-time shot deal. I have not landed in a warm, soft place after one easy jump. I am stepping closer to the edge of the chasm, peering deeply into the void, diving farther into the mystery. I am leaping again and again and again, feeling the soft, warm air flowing by me as I soar through the darkness, arms outstretched like newly sprouted wings. And even as I fall through the apparently empty space, I rest in the knowledge that I am guided by something much wiser than myself, that is taking me exactly where I need to go. Thank you again for being here, to our panelists and to all our other guests. Beverly, why don't we go ahead and we'll have you start off, and introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what brought you to this path of spiritual direction.
Thank you. Well, I'm a lifelong Episcopalian, an Episcopal priest for back to the first decade of women being ordained in the Episcopal Church, and a third order Franciscan. That's one of our religious orders that we have in the Episcopal Church. And I came to spiritual direction, well, pretty early on in terms of my seeing a spiritual director, and then becoming a spiritual director myself through the Franciscans when I was invited to be on the team for as a formation counselor for our novices and postulants. And that gave me the training and led me into then receiving other people outside of the Franciscan order for spiritual direction. So I've been doing that for 30 some, closer to 40 years. And that's my background. My meditation practice has been an important thing that has really helped and augmented doing spiritual direction, being a spiritual director for others.
Wonderful, thank you. Douglas, I will pass it off to you with the same question, a little bit about your background and what drew you to spiritual direction.
Sure, I think coming mid-story would actually be more interesting. So I actually came back to Christianity through psychedelics. It was my experience with psychedelics that actually made me come back to understand my childhood Christianity. And I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, and then as an adult became a Quaker. But I had left it for a while. And then after some very powerful mystical experiences under psychedelics, and then the pandemic, I was alone. It was just me and my dog. I wasn't touched by another human being for about 6 months, but instead of being a difficult time, it was a magical, mystical time of retreat. And during that time, I realized I wanted to study. And I ended up in a spiritual director training program without thinking that I'd want to be a spiritual director. But I discovered during that process, that 2-year process, that being with people while they're doing spiritual direction is its own spiritual experience for myself.
Thank you. Annette, would you share with us about your background as well?
Sure. So I grew up mostly in South Africa and New Zealand, and within a very conservative evangelical Christian context. I've got grandparents who were missionaries in Zambia, so we're kind of been Christian down the generations. And I've also always, I remember from a young age, being drawn to conversations, I mean, what some people call deep and meaningful conversations. So always interested in conversations about meaning and why are we here and what are we talking about when we talk about God. And there are not many people around, even within church, who really want to dig deep with those conversations. So I was somewhat frustrated, and it was in my early 30s that I went on my first retreat, which was only a 24-hour thing. And there was I didn't really know about retreats and how to do them, but I came across a book on one of their bookshelves, and it was a novel by Susan Howitch. And she's an English novelist who was known for writing kind of sex and shopping novels. And then she had a midlife, what she would now understand to be a spiritual breakthrough. It felt like a breakdown at the time. And her novel writing changed. So it still had quite a lot of the sexiness going on with really interesting characters, but she centered these novels around a fictional cathedral and all the clergy and lay people and their lives and traumas. But through these novels, there was this thread of conversations with one of the characters called Jonathan Darrow. And he was a monk who offered spiritual direction. And he was also very psychologically informed. And I just came through this, I whipped my way through this series of novels and just thought, I need to find my own Jonathan Darrow. I need to go out there and look for him. And so went in search of a spiritual director. And it took me a while because within the context of my church tradition, it just wasn't known. And when it was known, it wasn't really approved of. Anyway, I eventually tracked somebody down, and I've been in spiritual direction ever since for close on 30 years now. And then at some point when my own spiritual director was returning to her home in Australia, she said, you know, what are you going to do? And why wouldn't you think of doing this training yourself? Which at the time absolutely flabbergasted me, because I was quite in awe of the skill that she had and the generosity of the offering that she offered. But what persuaded me was that she gave me a book to read, and I'm now not being able to remember the name of the book, but in it, it talks about spiritual direction being a form of deep hospitality and also a kind of midwifery. And I had had 2 children at that stage, and I just thought midwives were angels, like sent from above. I just thought they were the most amazing people with amazing skills. And that persuaded me. So I'd never wanted to be a midwife. I come from a very medical family, never interested me, but I thought, okay, this is how I can be a midwife. And I've always loved being hospitable in all the very kind of obvious ways of offering hospitality. So that's what brought me in. And here I am.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you as well. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting path. I think everyone finds their way here. It doesn't seem like it's ever a plan. And the other part that you touched on is how challenging it was to find a spiritual director. And I think many of us could relate to that process as well. And there's still so much, like, what is a spiritual director? So now I'll go around and if each of you would share a little bit about what is in your words, what is the spiritual director, and what is this offering? What does this practice of spiritual direction look like? Let's go ahead and we'll start with Douglas this time.
Well, I love Annette's analogy or metaphor of midwifery, because I was trained by the Franciscans, and it was actually one of our chief metaphors of spiritual midwifery. And my teacher, Sister Mary Jo, said that spiritual direction is while the soul is being born, and how that soul is being witnessed and welcomed is very important. So yeah, I think the idea of just witnessing and welcoming someone as they look into their spiritual lives is the task of a spiritual director.
Thank you. Annette, would you like to share with us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, everything that Douglas said. And what I'd add is, for me, the value of it has been of this ongoing witness to my life. My own spiritual director, who has sat, oh my goodness, her patience with me has been just amazing. When I look back, I've been so slow coming more deeply. And even though I thought I was this deep and meaningful person, in terms of real kind of, I guess, surrender to whatever it is that God is, has taken me a long time. And so patient witnessing and radical acceptance of anything that comes up. So anything that's a bit out of the box of regular Christian thought or practice, anything that looks like failure in life. You know, I've been through a divorce. It was horrible. I felt like such a failure, and yet she patiently sat with me and helped me continue to find God in the experience, or at least God supporting me through the experience. And just a belief in me that I didn't have in myself, I guess, for a long time. Somebody who could see God in me and the Spirit at work in me when I found that hard to believe for myself. And so just full of gift. And that's what I hope to offer other people.
Thank you. A lot of head nodding. I think those that have had experience of being with a spiritual director can relate to so much of that. Beverly, would you share with us your thoughts on this as well?
Yes, I agree with these. Someone, I think a spiritual director is someone who is a companion, not a director. They are someone who can listen deeply and compassionately, and then ask the right questions, the kinds of questions that will help that person draw out from within themselves the knowledge that they may not even know that they have, and connect it then to what is your relationship? How does this speak to you about God and your relationship there? Tying that back in, helping people find their own spiritual gifts and grounding to address the issues that are there in their lives. So a spiritual director is not a therapist, is not a someone who is to fix problems, but someone who is there to companion you in a God-based, holy space for that person to discover and encounter for themselves the divine at work in their lives. Grace is a big word in my my vocabulary.
I love that. Yeah, that grace piece feels so relevant. I was just reflecting on, with my spiritual director, that was one of the first places I could go that it was so non-judgmental. It was just full of grace. And like Annette had said, just kind of open to the things that were outside of the box, which also, like Douglas said, were these very mystical experiences I had had on psychedelics that I had nowhere else to go and make meaning and find a way to navigate that. So yeah, thank you, each of you. I know you're amazing practitioners, and I just love hearing the different flavors of what you all bring. Okay, so the next question I've got is in regards to this unfolding or reemergence of the psychedelic landscape, how do each of you see spiritual directors fitting into this? Annette, I will let you start this one off, if you would.
So I suppose in lots of the ways that we've talked about already, so in many of the ways that ongoing regular spiritual direction happens, this radical acceptance, non-judgmental, hospitality, midwifery, wanting to help something be birthed, all of that applies to the psychedelic space as well. I think at the moment, the radical acceptance is particularly important because people are still thinking, is this okay? Is it all right? Nobody's more surprised than me to find myself a Christian psychedelic spiritual director. Not on the, that was not on my radar until about 18 months ago. And how else? I think in ways, in some of the tools that these ancient spiritual traditions offer. So my training is in Ignatian spirituality, and there are very really helpful practical tools around discernment. Of how do we know that we can trust an experience? What do we listen for? What do we look for? How do we integrate it into our lives? What are the practices? Repetition, which isn't in terms of psychedelics, wouldn't be go and do some more psychedelics, but of what you've been shown, how can you revisit and help it, let it deepen, and what are the practices that are going to help do that? Yeah, that's enough from me.
again. Beverly.
So I see the role of a spiritual director with people who are engaging with psychedelics as a resource person for not just for understanding what happened or exploring what happened in a psychedelic experience, but in preparation also. And then in how do you live afterwards too. It's a continuum that helping people look at their own spiritual history and spiritual practices and what intention are they bringing to the psychedelic experience, then have that as a grounding for them. For me, going into experience of psychedelics with a long experience of practice in meditation, my experience then simply confirmed some of the things that I had been experiencing in meditation. And it was like, oh yeah, that matches up, and I can continue on from there with that. For people who do not have a religious background, and coming into psychedelics, so many people say they're spiritual but not religious. But then there's well, how can I support what I've experienced? How can I find meaning from this? How can I ground this? And the role of the spiritual director will be to offer the resources. One thing that my own spiritual director had made so clear to me when I started meditation, he says, well, you got to take one form of meditation, you explore all of these, but take one form and go deeply. That's the only way you can do it. You honor the tradition, that spiritual tradition, because it's had centuries behind it, millennia behind it in some cases, that makes that a well-grounded practice. But if you just sample here and there different things, that's like trying to dig a well and only going a foot there, didn't hit water, go a foot over here, didn't hit water, foot over here, didn't hit water. No, you got to go deep on some of these. So connecting that, those psychedelic experiences into spiritual practices that can help go deeper.
Wonderful, thank you. Douglas, would you share with us your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I love what both of you have said. I think I would start with this. I mean, psychedelics offer like a very deep sense of aliveness in the moment. And the danger of that is believing that's it, right? Like that is the spiritual experience. And the whole trick of it is realizing that all of life is the spiritual experience. Like this is it, you know, what we're experiencing now. And so like Houston Smith, who is a wonderful religious scholar, he said like, spiritual experiences do not make a spiritual life. And so, you know, my whole interest when I did psychedelics and then in spiritual direction for myself and for my directees is like, whatever your experience is, what does it mean? How do you want to live now? And so, yeah, I think the other way I put it is like, psychedelics are not the path. And there's danger in thinking like taking psychedelics and like, oh, this is my spiritual path, because you just have these like really powerful experiences. But psychedelics are a gateway. Like, you know, you can go through, but you got to walk afterwards.
Thank you for that. Yes, yes, yes.
I could add to that too, of saying, I've seen in other situations, not just psychedelics, people who have had a strong spiritual experience, and then that becomes the defining point for everything they're on, and they keep going back to that one point without growing beyond there. It's like on the Mount of Transfiguration, here's this fantastic psychedelic experience, and what does Peter say? Well, let's build 3 tabernacles here, and just, you know, we want to build something around it, institutional church, or just something that concretizes that experience and hold it right there. When the truth was, you got to go back down the mountain and then heal the demon-possessed boy at the bottom.
Okay, our next question. If you would each share on how psychedelics or working as a spiritual director and having directees that have had psychedelics experiences has transformed your life or your practice, if at all. And we'll start with Annette.
How psychedelics transformed my life, yeah, in my own practice, or seeing other people.
Yes, that's perfect.
So I had come into a very different relationship with the world through them, in particular with nature. And I would, we don't have to have labels, but it was amusing and to me to find myself thinking, oh, maybe I'm a Christian animist. So I just have a very different relationship with nature, with the planet. My other line of inquiry in life at the moment is ecology and the climate crisis and feeling helpless and frustrated and all that goes along with that. And I just have a different love for the natural world, which also has heartbreak come with it because of what is happening. But also trust that the natural world knows what it's doing if we can just let it do what it knows to do. I've had beautiful experiences. One of my experiences was where I went and lay outside about halfway through the experience, just in my tiny little concrete courtyard, but where I had some very young sapling trees in pots, getting ready for the day when I might have a garden that I could plant them in. And I was lying there watching them and watching the birds above me and watching the insects around me. And I had this deep understanding that every one of them and every part of creation is a hymn of praise. And everything from the flies to the trees, to the birds, to the rocks, even the rock shall cry out. They are all playing their part in this giant cosmic hymn of praise. And I guess I understand the cosmos now in some sense as the body of God. So that's a big thing that informs my life in a completely new way to what I'd have said before. And there are other things as well, but that'll do.
Profound. Beverly, would you share with us?
Yes, I got involved with the psychedelics through Hunt and a chance meeting that we happened to have. But I did that because my own spiritual director a few years ago had told me that what I needed to do next in my spiritual growth and work was to explore psychedelics. And I thought to myself, what in the world am I saying to you? I'm an Episcopal priest. I'm a friend. I don't do those things. I didn't do them back in the 60s when there was a lot of that going on. But why is he saying that? And then, Hunt and I had worked together at Emanuel Mercer Island. And both of us had long since gone. And a couple of years later, we both showed up back at that congregation on a visit in Seattle, unbeknownst to each other. And it was like the Holy Spirit, sort of put this together. We had lunch together afterwards, and he told me about what he was doing. And I thought, this is being just laid out in front of me on a silver platter as other wonderful things that have happened in my life. It seems like the Holy Spirit sort of puts those there for you. I could take it or not. Well, I took it, and joined him in the Netherlands a year and a half ago, just about it was, and then continuing on with that, with seeing my own spiritual director and talking about what it was I had experienced, and my spiritual director says, well, you need to practice a little bit more in this field too. And I thought, oh, great, this is going to be something. and my family thought this was really funny. And so what I see in that, what I've experienced in that is how it has confirmed my life experiences and my theology, which has evolved over the decades with life experiences, and how this is a natural, organic kind of resource that you can use with spiritual practice, but you learn the limitations and you learn the possibilities, but you don't have particular expectations. That's one of the things you have to do in meditation. You show up, you pay attention to what's going on, you release your expectations of it, and then you trust the outcome. And you do that within this safe context of the spiritual practices that are ongoing and your spiritual director.
Wow. I love the story of those divine synchronicities and encounters. It's like the more, yeah, there's more.
Cosmic entanglement, as Sister Ilia Delio would say.
Yes, yes. Douglas, will you share with us on this as well?
Sure. So again, I came back to Christianity / religion through psychedelics. So my story comes from having really deep mystical experiences that I did not have a language for. And it was trying to find a language for that I started reading the mystical texts from around the world, like the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, Christian mystics, the Sufis. And, the beautiful thing is, I understood them in a way that I would have never understood before. And secondly, Father Richard Bohr says, they're all fingers pointing at the same moon, right? Don't mistake the finger for the moon itself. But one of my spiritual mentors said, I think following Beverly, he said that it's wonderful to read texts from around the world, but you will go farther and deeper if you choose one path. You're circling the mountain on some level, and you're never going up if you just do the sampler plate, right? So because I grew up Christian, I chose Christianity as my path. But I look back using the language of Christianity at my psychedelic experiences, and I see as some of my experiences as experiences of undifferentiated grace. And I see, like Nancy, she put in the chat, why go to the mountaintop if you have to come back down? And it reminds me of a Jack Kornfield book called After the Ecstasy, the Laundry. And I think about once you've had an experience of grace, the scales have been removed from your eyes. What afterwards? And Jack Kornfield in that book tells this beautiful story of through meditation, he reaches these states that Beverly may have reached herself, and comes back to his teacher, his Thai meditation teacher, relays experience, and his teacher just nods sagely and just smiles and says, "Wonderful, just another experience to let go of." And I think, interestingly enough, I'm not really interested in psychedelics anymore. I'm really interested in life here on Earth. My understanding of Christianity is, we're surrounded by grace, by God's grace, right? In fact, as Sister Mary Jo told me in my Franciscan spiritual director training, we're drenched in God's grace. We couldn't help it if we tried, right? It surrounds us. The only choice we have is, are we going to participate? And that participation in God's grace, that's what I'm really interested in. Like, heaven is here on earth. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. I think too, along with that, why go up is that when that's removed, there's a taste of something that's been so lacking in our society for so long. Just we were so disconnected culturally, but I think more than just our culture here, from deep experience of God for so long, for so very long, and that for me at least, that taste of it, that experience of God in a way that I hadn't yet found outside of, has made it easier to see that dripping grace everywhere. And when I forget that feeling of like, oh, but I know somewhere in my body, I know, and I feel how I am connected to this. Thank you. Okay, so Beverly, you touched on it a little bit, but I know we've all had conversations regarding preparation and integration. And so if each of you would take a little bit of time to share your thoughts on the importance of both of those, and maybe even a little bit of what that looks like, what preparation and integration look like. And we will go ahead and start with Beverly.
Well, ideally, a person would be seeing a spiritual director or someone who would be helping them prepare for the experience, not just something you do casually at a party or on a weekend. But this is looking at the intention that you have. Why are you doing this? Why is this important? Why is it important at this particular time? What's going on in my life right now? And what needs are there that I'm making? Am I making assumptions about? Will this experience meet these needs? And just helping to sort through some of that. That's part of, I think, the preparation. And then being clear about what is my intention? Is it for something very specific, or can I say, I'm open to what this may be telling me? A whole number of different levels within that. And then for the follow-up on that, because with most wonderful experiences, it's great at that time. There's an afterglow to it. And then there's the fade. And that's when I think things become more real in terms of, all right, so what does this mean, and how do I live, and what are the implications? And those are all the things that need to be in mind when one is going to engage in this experience as a spiritual practice or tool.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of ongoing journey of unpeeling that onion after you've had the experience.
Right. And seeing how that fits into what am I seeing changes in my life, and going from there.
Douglas, will you share with us?
Yeah, there's a common phrase in psychedelia that says, you will not get what you want, but you'll get what you need. And so it's funny to talk about preparation, because I think on some level, preparation is just preparing to surrender. And the way I was taught, which is a beautiful way to think about it, is like psychedelics is somewhat like meditation. Like the practice is like breathing. You receive, you hold, and then you let go. And sometimes psychedelics will take you to the precipice or beyond the precipice, and you don't know what's on that other side. And being able to surrender to not knowing, I think, is one of the beautiful practices of psychedelics. In terms of integration, I think, yeah, I mean, again, I think it's this idea that life, whatever you experience on psychedelics is happening all the time, right? Like the only thing psychedelics allowed you to do is it took, you know, from a nerdy science perspective, like maybe it took off your default mode network for a couple hours, or, you know, the blinders that you always had on to be able to function in this world were removed. But I think the super secret is like that's happening all the time, and we're just blocking it out necessarily. And the integration is realizing, oh, that's happening all the time. How do I live like that? And it's the most difficult and most interesting practice there is.
Mhm. It's definitely.
Thank you, Douglas. That's saying much better what I was trying to get at.
Beautiful. Thank you. Annette, will you share with us as well?
All of the above, as usual. And I was thinking about how we were prepared, or I was prepared for my first experience, which took part as part of a 3-month course that I did that centered around the work of Gabor Mate. So it wasn't just about psychedelics, but there was a psychedelic retreat in the middle of it. And so we had met as a larger group of about 60 people, but then as a smaller group of about 16 who were the people that we would go on retreat with eventually in the Netherlands. And so I think I'm very grateful for the preparation they did with us on all sorts of levels. There was the level of intention and really helping us hone. I actually had a 10-minute conversation with Gabor Mate on honing an intention. And we had a facilitator online that we would have those conversations with. But we also had these group sessions where we got to know each other. We did various exercises that helped us be vulnerable together. And then we had some really practical sessions about what you might expect, or what's the kit that you need to take with you when you do this, because you might get cold, you might get hot, you're going to need water. So I think there's lots of levels of the preparation, and the practical stuff is important and really helpful. And there's a group of us as the UK Ligare group who are going to plan a retreat in the Netherlands together. And I'm sort of one of the people helping, and Hunt's going to be involved as well, I think. But so I would insist that people came to these groups, to a certain number of group sessions before we go. That there needs to be group preparation, preparation on all those different ways, and some one-to-ones as well on helping people prepare both mentally, psychologically, and spiritually. And then afterwards, it would be something of the same, that we meet again as a group, online or in person. We make space for some individual sessions. And yeah, it's all that Beverly and Douglas have spoken about. What is this now going to look like in your life? And what are the practices that are going to help you ground it? Those are the things I think of.
That's really helpful. I think that is so important. There's, like you said, so many different things to do to prepare. And I also like that you talk about, and there's so many amazing tools and access to tools now for psychological preparation, physical day of preparation, but also spiritual practices that kind of, Beverly's really talked a lot about meditation. And I too found my way back to Christianity. I was raised Christian and moved away from it and began practicing Buddhism because meditation was so incredibly helpful. And I didn't have a place within the Christian container, at least in my upbringing, that offered these practices that really kind of nourished and loosened the soil for this type of work. So I'd be curious each of you would share now just some of the spiritual practices that you've utilized within your tradition that I don't think the majority of people have access to or have even heard of. Douglas, will you start us off?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I'm seeing a thread in the conversation about eclectic versus diving into one particular practice. And I'm actually more on the eclectic side. I'm not only did I grow up Christian and I was trained by the Franciscans, but I would say for most of my adult life, my spiritual path has been more towards the Eastern traditions, like Taoist and Buddhist. In fact, my dog's name was Wu Wei for any of the Taoists out there. I don't feel like I personally have a tradition per se. My tastes are quite Catholic, to use the original term, but I do feel like having a language from my Christian childhood is really helpful. Like one of the reasons I chose Christianity is I realized, oh, I'm never going to read Pali. I'm never going to read transcript. I don't read Chinese. And so my parents, who actually are Christian too, but they can read Chinese. They understand Taoist texts on a much deeper level than I do. So that's, I'd say the paradox is, that is the advantage of choosing your tradition. And at the same time, I say choose from a lot of different places.
Mm-hmm.
But last thing I would say is, my personal practice is, to use, but from the Hindus, like my personal practice is what they call karma yoga. Like I want to practice the whole idea that we live in grace. Like I want to live as such, and I want my money to be going as such. I want, how I treat my family, how I treat the beggar on the street. Like that's the way I want to practice.
Yes. Annette, will you share with us?
Sure. Yeah, I've been interested to see that thread in the conversation. And I'm suddenly thinking of a book that I read within the last couple of years. Can't remember if I came to it before I discovered psychedelics or not, by Thomas Moore, and I think it's called A Religion of One's Own, or A Religion of Your Own. And he was some version of a monk who left, became a psychotherapist, got married. I think his wife is Japanese, so her practice is a Shinto practice, I think. And he was just encouraging us to find the things that are meaningful to you, and then commit yourself to those. So it's not like you have to choose, I've got to say Christian prayers and only go with that. But be faithful to the things that you do choose and practice those, rather than, every week, every month or something, trying something different. I think that's more, but by all means be eclectic. Find the things that are helpful. And for me, the things that have been helpful are walking regularly in nature. And I've been very fortunate to move to a rural area in the last couple of years. So I go walking in the woods and by the river, and that does it for me. I would say yoga is part of my practice, although I confess I've not been very regular at it recently. I'm not a natural meditator, but I do a bit of that, and I appreciate it when I do. And I think, like Douglas says, it's a kind of a way of life. So I live a more contemplative way of life, so that everything kind of gets included when I prepare food, or listen to music, or play the piano. There's a different kind of awareness or consciousness that I bring to that. God, Ignatius, who I studied and taught on a course for a long time, and is kind of at the heart of my spiritual direction practice, says, look for God in all things. And that's I guess what I try to bring to life.
Love that. Yes, that whatever your spiritual practice begins to develop as, that you just stay faithful to that and committed to that. Keep showing up, no
Yeah.
matter what the weather is doing in life. Beverly, will you share with us?
Yes. My spiritual director that I've been seeing for, it's been going on 30 years now, knows me pretty well at this particular point. And he is another Episcopal priest, but he came out of a background of transcendental meditation, where he was very much involved with that, so much so that he spent time in Switzerland with the Maharishi. And so he was, the meditation classes he'd teach, he'd present all of the various different types of meditation to us. And so that was great for me to look at these different things. It helped me move out of some very narrow thinking that we might say would be exclusive rather than inclusive, and broaden my perspective in that way. So much so that I even went to India and spent some time with, a spiritual master there and exploring things in India. And that person who gave me a mantra said to put this into your own tradition, so it contains a form of the name of Jesus in the mantra that was given to me. And I very much appreciate that. I spent time at the ashram Shantavanam, where Don B. Griffiths had been, and listening, and he had been very closely connected with Ramana Maharshi. It's very close to that particular holy place. But all of this is to say that these other practices have informed my own, the study of the Tao Te Ching, looking at the Sufi writings and Jewish mysticism. Those all have informed my own practice in various ways. But it does have that core grounding, which is part of, I was raised, I'm a born and bred Episcopalian. I was raised within that tradition. That's my tribe, and that's colored my life formation from very early on. And so it's brought into that. So it's not being exclusive, it's just saying, take what is most natural for you and look at what fits for that, and go deeply with that.
Well, thank you, each of you, so much for being here. You are all very wise and caring practitioners, and the time has just flown by. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Hunt, and we will either take questions or do some closing.
Sorry, God, I was having a little technical difficulty. Sorry about that. First of all, I want to thank Alyssa for pulling this together, Tim King, who's been doing some tech support in the background, and then to our three other spiritual directors. Alyssa's a spiritual director too. She didn't say much about her own practice, but she's doing that as well. And all four of these people are gifted and committed to this intersection of psychedelics and not just Christianity, but religion. I posted two things in the chat just now. One's Alyssa's email address, and she's one of the really good points of contact. I know several people on this call have been trying to get a hold of me through my email, and I'm backed up, but I will get to it, I promise. I was just in Denver about a month or in June, and I posted an article about the Psychedelic Science Conference and this intersection with the world's religion. Very important. Several of the keynoters there, including some of the top names in psychedelic research and practice, say that the intersection of religion and psychedelics is the most important and exciting thing that's happening right now. Religion gets a bad name, and a lot of it well-deserved, but these religious systems, these belief systems, these structured systems of story and ritual and spiritual practice have great and deep value.
And I think part of the work we want to do is all of us, whether it's Christianity or another one, is to get these systems up, just kind of caught up and clean in a way, so that we can, there's great value in the world's religions. And I think that's what people in the psychedelic space are starting to see, if they didn't see it already. So it's not about excluding, as the other panelists have said, it's about, I think, finding a container, and these traditions are time tested. And then Buddhism has been an important part of my practice, or my formation as a Christian. I'm a better Christian because of my engagement with people like Thich Nhat Hanh and other Buddhist teachers, and my Jewish sisters and brothers, and my Muslim sisters and brothers. So they've informed all of us, and yet I'm standing firmly in the Christian container and tradition and path. So anyway, that's kind of my take on that. Please take a look at that article I just sent. It really is a good overview of the Psychedelic Science Conference. It's also a good overview of where this is headed, I think, in the religious world. There were a lot of questions there, and I'm sorry we couldn't take more of those. I want to just offer a quick closing for us. This will be available. We'll turn it around as quickly as we can, and to get it back out to everyone. We had a lot of people signed up that I know didn't come, so because that's just the way life goes. But 86 people, which is wonderful, in a midweek, midday. So thank you all. Thanks to the 4 panelists, or the 4 people on the call. And I'll offer a short prayer for us, and we'll see you next time. Life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those we travel with. So be quick to love and make haste to be kind. And the blessing of God, who creates, redeems, and sustains all that there is, be upon you and all those you love, this day and always. Amen.